We cannot accelerate time, but we can accelerate our actions, using the time we have today to transform the future. In line with the UN's Sustainable Development Goals for 2030, Braskem has made new commitments to people and the planet. Working in 7 different dimensions, we have set several goals for the coming years, related to eliminating plastic waste, expansion of our I'm Green renewable and recycled portfolio, promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion, and our ambition for carbon neutrality by 2050 to combat climate change. We will transform the world to be a more sustainable place for everyone, now and for generations to come. Braskem, a more sustainable future, today. We cannot accelerate time, but we can accelerate our actions, using the time we have today to transform the future. In line with the UN's Sustainable Development Goals for 2030, Braskem has made new commitments to people and the planet. Working in 7 different dimensions, we have set several goals for the coming years, related to eliminating plastic waste, expansion of our I'm Green renewable and recycled portfolio, promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion, and our ambition for carbon neutrality by 2050 to combat climate change. We will transform the world to be a more sustainable place for everyone, now and for generations to come. Braskem, a more sustainable future, today.
Good afternoon. Welcome to all attendees to this seminar. My name is Annie Levasseur and I will chair this seminar. So I'm a professor at École de Technologie Supérieure, which is an engineering faculty in Montreal. So it's a pleasure for me to chair this seminar, and the topic today will be about the potential climate benefits of temporary absorption of biogenic carbon in products. So of course, as you know, bioproducts and bioenergy is often considered as interesting from an environmental point of view because it's renewable and it's also biodegradable. Also, we often assume that there's a climate benefits to use bioproducts and bioenergy compare with fossil counterparts. One of the main reasons for this is that the carbon content of the bioproduct, the carbon that is there, it will be emitted at the end of life, but it has been uptaken from the atmosphere while biomass was growing. So it's kind of considered climate neutral or close to climate neutral. Of course, we also have to consider all the life cycle emissions when we compare those bioproducts with their fossil counterparts. And of course, also, you probably already heard about different environmental issues that we also must take into account. For instance, a competition for land or water or biodiversity issues. But during this seminar, we will address specifically the biogenic carbon issue. So it can be quite complicated, basically, to model the impact on biogenic carbon from producing and using bioproducts. We have to compare how the carbon stock changes when we grow biomass compared with the natural counterpart. And we, as we will see today, we need to account for climate in soils, climate in biomass. And at the end of this seminar, we will address one specific issue, which is there a benefit to store some carbon in the product during the use life of the product. So we will discuss this. But before, we will have 5 presentations from different speakers. So here is how it will work. So we will have 5 speakers. Each of them will have 15 minutes to make their presentation. After each of these presentations, we are going to have a very short period for clarifying questions. And for additional, more general questions, we will wait until the end. So after the 5 speakers, we will then have a longer discussion period in order to answer your general questions and also to answer the questions related to the topic of this seminar about potential climate benefits of temporary absorption of biogenic carbon in products. So that's how it will work. And I will not wait longer, and I will present you the first speaker today. So it will be Hugo Maria Chali. He's head of multilateral environmental cooperation at DG Environment of the European Commission. So Mr. Chali holds a doctorate of law degree from the University of Graz in Austria and is a graduate of the Diplomatic Academy of Vienna, also in Austria. In his early career, he practiced law in Klagenfurt, Austria. He worked for the United Nations Development Program in Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso, before joining the Austrian Ministry for Foreign Affairs. Since 1998, he has held positions in the DGs for External Relations, Development, and Environment of the European Commission. Most recently, he was head of unit for Sustainable Production, Products and Consumption in the Directorate for Circular Economy and Green Growth of DG Environment of the European Commission. And since January 2019, he is head of unit for Multilateral Environmental Cooperation in the Directorate for Global Sustainable Development in DG Environment of the European Commission. So Mr. Chali will present the European Green Deal, a strategy aiming at bringing together sustainability, innovation, and prosperity. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Annie, and I hope you will be able to see the presentation. Yes, here it is. Basically, I will try to run through the main elements of the European Green Deal in the time allotted, which is a challenge. And I will dwell on one particular issue that I think is topical in the context of our conversation today, which is the issue of bioplastics. So just next slide. I think that it's important to put everything into perspective. And I think I've taken some elements from the recently published Peace with Nature report from UNEP, which really shows how our overall impact on the world has changed. And if you go to the next slide, to see how we now as humans have a major impact on Earth and how the animals that we domesticate have a main impact on Earth and how that compares with the wild animals in that regard. Next slide. And that is the recognition that has been given at the political level in the EU for trying to address the major environmental and sustainability challenges, and that those, in these words, that the European Green Deal had been presented by President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, in the sense that, going to the next slide, it is now time to act. And time to act in the sense that we need to put a strategy forward that will improve the quality of life of current and future generation. And I think that it's an all-encompassing strategy which actually should ensure a just inclusive transition, should protect human life, restore biodiversity, cut pollution, move to clean and circular economy, help companies to become leaders in clean product and technologies, but also, and I think that's important for a discussion that we're having here, lead by example in the global context. Next slide. And I think that it really, it's a plan to deliver on Europe's climate, environmental and social target, but it's not focused on the environment only. If you go to the next slide, it's a very impressive array of strategies and legislation that is being rolled out since the since middle of 2019 until the end of next year, when all the initiatives that we have, and there are more than 40, will be on the table. And I will only talk about a few of them that are actually crucial for the discussion that you're having today. First is the ambition for the European Union, next slide, to become climate neutral. And we will do that not least by helping the industry to innovate. Next slide. Sorry, I always forget that. Roll out cleaner transport, decarbonize the energy sector, and ensure that buildings are more energy efficient. Move to the next slide. And you can't do all that without money. So we have actually we will put in place a Green Deal investment plan and a just transition mechanism, which actually will mobilize over the next 10 years €1 trillion on investments for public and private investment, additional measures to facilitate and boost green public and private investment, and technical assistance in that regard. Now, legally speaking, and we move to the next slide, we look at a number of key initiatives. One is the European Climate Law, and the other, the Climate Pact, which has been proposed by the Commission last December, will establish binding targets for climate neutrality in law, which is applicable across the EU, and that taking care of creating a level playing field in the EU with regard to moving towards our zero pollution ambition. Now, complementary to that, we have the Climate Pact, which is the civil society element of the climate ambition, bringing together the regions, civil society, businesses, and schools. And that is something that is crucial to actually bring together action at all levels of society and member states in that regard. Moving next to a key tool and enabler in meeting our climate and biodiversity ambitions, it's the EU Circular Economy Action Plan. You will remember, moving to the next slide, that we had the first Circular Economy Action Plan in December 2015 that brought about a large number of initiatives and legislation. Among them, and I'll come back to that later, the European Plastics Strategy. And now with the second Circular Economy Action Plan, we will actually take it one level further, focusing on promoting the sustainability of products by design, fostering sustainable consumption, aiming, in short, to ensure that the resources that are used and encompassed in products are kept in the economy for as long as possible. And that, really going to the next slide, is focusing on changing the way we produce and consume. Now, moving on to the Circular Economy Action Plan is very much focused on what we would say the brown part of the economy: industry, technology, and the use of abiotic materials. But of course, and we move on to the next slide, we have a crucial issue in also realizing the biotic wing of the circular economy butterfly. And therefore, we have a number of key strategies, the first of it being the EU Biodiversity Strategy for 2030. And I think that, moving on to the next slide, the background to that is it is time, which is globally also recognized, to fix our broken relationship with nature. And I think that in that sense, on the EU side, moving on to the next slide, we want to create a coherent trans-European nature network by protecting at least 30% of land in Europe and 30% of territorial sea and inland waters of Europe, with a stricter protection of remaining EU primary and old growth forests. And if we go further, we actually will enact into law legally binding nature restoration targets by establishing legally binding obligations from member states to restore degraded ecosystems at land and sea across the whole of Europe by a number of measures that you can see here. But this is part of the nature in terms of the conservation of it. But there is also, as we see in the context of the Convention on Biodiversity, there's also the issue of the sustainable use, which is why we're moving into the next initiative, which is the EU Farm to Fork Strategy, which is on the next slide, and we can immediately move forward, which is the challenge of changing global food systems that are currently putting incredible pressure on the natural environment. But as there are in nature, they simultaneously depend on it. And food systems are very closely linked to climate and environment problems. The high demand for agricultural commodities, for fish, meat, animal feed, contribute to global biodiversity loss. And I think that subsidies in the EU and elsewhere have helped keep food prices lower, but contributed little to sustainable food production. So we want to facilitate in the EU, but worldwide, the transition to a fair, healthy, and environmentally friendly food systems. Moving on to the next slide. So we want to put in place a sustainable food strategy by simplifying and shortening supply chains, encouraging more seasonal production consumption, protecting biodiversity, and reducing greenhouse gas emissions through greater uptake of agricultural practices and less agricultural expansion that rely less on artificial inputs and are closer to nature. And also a greater diversity of crops and vegetables. Now, targets for food production, it is reduce the use of chemical pesticides, reduce nutrient losses, reduce sales of antimicrobials for farmed animals, and bring 25% of agricultural land under organic farming. So you see an overall ambitious strategy in many areas. I have not mentioned many others like transportation, construction, mobility, hydrogen, which are also elements that are relevant in that regard. But all of that is not going to work if we cannot engage. Let's go to the next level, next slide. If we cannot engage globally with our partners worldwide to engage with us in the same transformational activities. So European Green Deal is, to a large extent, we want to lead by example by showing that certain things we can do and we will do, even if it's stressful and difficult for us. But at the same time, we want to work with others to set standards for a sustainable growth across global value chain. And of course, we are there to use diplomacy, trade policy, and development and partnership cooperation to advance climate and biodiversity. I think that that gives you a little bit of an overview over the where we are with the European Green Deal. But I've seen that in the context of the discussion that we're having today, there is obviously the question of what is the point of using bio-based materials for the production of materials that are in everybody's use. And I think we're talking very much about plastics. Plastics, which is a priority issue for the European Union, as we already in 2018 enacted the EU plastic strategy, which led to quite a number of legislation and legislative proposals in the meantime. But I think one of the issues that came back time and again was is plastics that come from biological feedstocks a sustainable alternative over conventional plastic that comes from fossil feedstocks. And I think with regard to what we think about that in the EU, the jury is still out, because we think that when assessing bio-based plastics, we need to see whether the sourcing, labeling, and use of bio-based plastics need to result in genuine environmental benefit going beyond, and I think Annie already referred to that in her introduction, going beyond the climate change evidence. And I think that it's clear that from our point of view, it's very important to look at that from a scientific perspective. And the use of bio-based and biodegradable plastics must also look at specific applications where the use of materials that come from that can be beneficial for the environment, and what are the criteria that we would want to put for such applications. And I think that really that we need to come to a scientific knowledge that allow us to describe bio-based plastics and biodegradable plastics that result in genuine environmental benefits and are clear and trustworthy options to consumers contributing to the transition to a circular plastics economy. And I think that when we look at the different areas that we currently study, that we are currently not convinced that plastics that are bio-based as such are a valid solution for the overall environmental challenge that plastics put to the economy and to sustainability. And I think that only as very specific applications will be identified that, based on harmonized criteria and rules for labeling, can actually fit into the description of being a better product than conventional plastics in that regard. I think that is the state of discussion in the EU for now, and I think that's certainly a discussion that is worth having with partners around the world in that regard. So I thank you for your attention, and I'm certainly ready and available for questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shali. I'm just taking a look at the chat to see if we have clarifying questions. If so, I will ask them to you. And if not, we will wait until all the speakers have talked in order to have a more general discussion. So right now, I don't see any question in the chat. No questions so far. I'm being confirmed. So thank you very much, and see you later for the general discussion. So we'll go on with the second speaker, which is Mr. Harald Keb. Mr. Keb is the founder and owner of Narrowcon Innovation Consulting. He's a PhD chemist with a more than 25 years track record of professional services and expertise in sustainable chemistry and plastics. From 1999 to 2009, he has chaired the board of the European Bioplastic Industries Association. The circular and bio-based economy have built the fundament and action area of his association, of his complete business life. Sorry. Being very familiar with the scientific basis and regulatory framework, Harald consults major players up and down the global value chain to explain innovative, sustainable practices and businesses. He is very much convinced that the industry has a leading role to play in developing and applying sustainability principles in the plastic industry. So the presentation will be about bio-based plastics, a contribution to climate protection. So Mr. Keb, the floor is yours.
Hello, can you hear me well?
Yes.
So thank you very much, Annie, for that kind introduction, and thanks to everybody listening to, and also to the organizers. I'm very happy to contribute to this very interesting session on bio-based plastics and the specific contributions they can deliver for the climate protection. If I look at it, I think Brazil is a very important country. I've been several times to Brazil for business reasons, but also for holidays. It has this huge biodiversity, and it has an enormous potential of producing biomass. If we could start my presentation here with the next slide. I just received a kind introduction, so I want almost to skip this. I'm typically working as a strategic advisor, so I have lots of skills in all theories and in research and polymers and all kind of things, but I always try to support market development and answer strategic questions, typically within corporations, bigger ones typically, but also in smaller ones. They can be suppliers of plastics, but they can also be users of plastics. So I have quite a good picture of how industry and brands are looking at it. The next slide shows how important today the climate emergency is regarded. This is a pretty new title of the Time magazine from April, May this year, and it says climate is everything. And if you go to the next slide, you will see that also the industry leaders and the policy leaders that typically meet once a year in Davos, they have put up climate change to the highest priority in their agenda, and they have called upon policymakers and also to the industry to the need to act very fast. There are tipping points which could accelerate the climate change and make the emergency that we already see an even faster process. And they also see that the consequences would be so negative to so many countries, to so many people, and of course also to nature in general, to our whole world, that time plays a very important role. So it's not just about something is happening, something needs to happen very fast on a time scale, and that will be shown later also, that I think we don't do this as adequate, and also methodologies like LCA and carbon footprint accounting do not reflect that well. The next slide shows how important plastics have been. Hugo mentioned this already. Plastics are high on the agenda of policymakers and also of NGOs, of civil organizations, or of brands. They consume today a rather small part of the greenhouse gas emissions, or of the carbon budget, to be clear, but that will increase in future, because we will have more renewable energies, because we will replace oil and fossil resources in the energy world very much, but not so much that is on the agenda and on the programming of the material world. So in the material world, the use of oil will increase, and thus, if we don't change that, also the role of plastics, as plastics constitute a very big part of the organic chemistry. It's more than 50% is used of the oil for the production of plastic, of all organic chemicals. The next slide shows that if you switch to the next slide, please, that the Ellen MacArthur Foundation has shown this about 55%, so almost half percent of the total current emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, are related to energy purposes, to the production of energy, heat, electricity, and so on. But almost half of it is contained and used for products. So when we look at those half of the products, we would see if we want to cut emissions there, we have not so many chances to do that. We cannot decarbonize. We need the carbon in these products, in these materials. So we only could make the materials and the products more circular. That's part of the circular economy. Or we could use renewable or even greenhouse gas emissions sources for their production. In the next slide, you see how the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, which is a fantastic think tank where scientists and brands and industry comes together to figure out new ideas for the future, how a new circular plastics economy could work. So the idea has been introduced about 5 years ago. Today, we're in a very linear system. We do not close circles. So in the future, the design and the production must allow for a let's say long-term use and also reuse of products, and those materials should be well recyclable and not get lost in nature. So, for example, only a very small part of those products are naturally been lost in nature because they are used in the outside world, in the environment. And for these products, for example, as a special case, biodegradability and compostability can be an enormous advantage. But for the biggest part of the materials used in where we use plastics, they need to be kept in the system and circled. That means they need to be recyclable, and the recycling needs to allow for producing good recyclates to produce a recycled content in new products, which can allow for high value products. But as ever we want to do that, we will have naturally losses. in that system. We cannot recycle and circulate 100% of these materials and carbon contained. So we need to inject new carbon, and that should come from renewably sourced virgin feedstocks. So that can be CO2 or bio-based plastics. There you see the role. So if we go to the next slide, you see just an advertisement BASF has brought up on their capital markets days, and they shown their investors how that should work in the future. So yes, exactly like Alan MacArthur has described it, they can allow for introducing recycled content to their polymers and plastics that they are selling. You can also choose a certain bio-based content and, for example, also in future a CO2 content. And with that, the customers can exactly calculate how much they want to spend on reducing their carbon footprint. The next slide shows how the role of bio-based plastics could be there. So they allow for, and that's a slide the Environmental Agency of the European Union has published in a big study, that typically when you compare the different fossil and bio-based polymers together, that especially bio-based plastics have an enormous potential to bring down greenhouse gas emissions and also reduce the depletion of fossil resources. So here you see it's has been looked at PLA, at PHAs, but also at bio-based polyethylene. And if I look to the many LCAs that I have seen in the past 25 years, this is a pretty general, let's say, truth that there are big benefits here with bio-based plastics. The next slide, I'll come back to this. Maybe you will remember this also, because we have to address LCA again. Here, in this slide, you see the European market demand. So that's pretty close to consumption of plastics by segment and polymer last year. So that's the latest statistics that we have. You see that PE, polypropylene, polystyrene, and PVC together with PET, they make up about 80% of the total consumption. So only a few polymer types are serving most of our needs and serving 80% of the consumption. And the packaging sector is the biggest one, and then comes building and construction. If you have this in mind, we go first time to the bio-based plastics. Next slide, please. You see that we can cover these types of plastics that make these big volumes by bio-based feedstocks. You see that these plastics then are the ones that we would call recyclable in practice. There we build up recycling schemes in Europe, often for packaging. It's especially well done for PET and pretty good for PE, and a little bit also for PP. And for many other polymers, it's difficult to recycle them because it's difficult to collect them and get them back in a good shape. If you look to the more special plastics like biodegradable plastics and so on, you will see it's very difficult to build up recycling schemes for them. So they need to be used in very specific applications. But for the typical and I think big volume bio-based plastics, we can use the existing infrastructure for recycling and for recycled plastics. Next slide is showing us a very brief summary of how I look at bio-based plastic after all these years. So it's a complex family with various members, and I always educate people they should never use the term bioplastics. They should always use bio-based or biodegradable plastics. Sometimes it's also an bio-based biodegradable plastic. So the potential to substitute large parts of the fossil plastics is given, just shown to you, and I could talk for hours on how we could do this, but just take it as granted. It's not discussed anymore that we could replace big parts, at least in theory, from a technical potential and viewpoint by biomass-based plastics. So the bio-based material carbon is a really intrinsic advantage because it's non-fossil. So it covers this, let's say, half of the total greenhouse gas emissions. So then we have to look only at processes. Are they efficient at uses? Of course, but that's the same then like for standard plastics. There's no difference there, or not much difference if we at least look at the bulk plastics. And what we need to do, and I think that's topic here also, we need to look at sustainable feedstock sourcing, which is very much required to avoid negative land use change effects. So if we look at the market next, there is only a, please go on, there's only little knowledge about how much bio-based plastics are being used today. There is no official statistics available, and the data often that we find in literature often refer to the polymer capacities, which is not use, of course, it's just what could be potentially supplied to the markets. So these lack of information is to me a big gap also, which we should solve. We need to much more knowledge on which types of plastics and which for what kind of products are used if we call them bio-based. And there's also a huge difference in the bio-based content. Some like PE, for example, could be 100% bio-based. Others like PET today are only 35% bio-based. And if I look at the consumption, as I said, there's no data available. It covers about 1% of the total market. So that would be for Europe about 500,000 tons of a 50 million tons market. And it's half used for biodegradables and about half for bio-based, non-biodegradable plastics. So that's just a rough assumption, but there's not much better data there. The next slide shows you that it's not so much different for the recycled plastics. So where are these used? We also know only about the recycling capacity, but we don't know where the recycled plastics really go. There's a big lack also of solid market data there, and sometimes those recyclates are not used for plastic and polymer applications, but for replacing, let's say, concrete or glass or metal and so on. And yeah, you see, it's difficult if you want to find out how far we have advanced with the recycling. So today, the general view is that we have about, let's say, 6-7% use of recyclates in the European polymer market. That's small, and it's mainly used in building and construction in rather downcycled application, not very, let's say, level keeping applications, and only PET is used also in the packaging sector. Let's look how policymakers react to it. The US Plastic Pact in the next slide shows to you that I need to make that short also to give you a few other information, that one of the biggest targets today is, of course, to increase recycling, but also use recycled content. And the US, for example, they have this really ambitious target of using either recycled content or responsibly sourced bio-based content in plastics packaging, and that in the magnitude of 30%. So they put it at equal level, whether it's recycled or bio-based. And I think we should all do this because that's the big challenge, is to not use virgin fossil plastics anymore. The next point has been, the next slide has very well been explained by Hugo Maria Chali, so I can keep that short. Plastics are high on the EU policy agenda. They have been also high on the media agenda here in Europe. We're talking about plastics almost every day. Even through the pandemic, we had seen this. And yeah, the big objective is, if you look to the next slide also, just like Alan MacArthur has formulated it in their circular economy vision, that recyclates should be used as much as possible. And the European Union is even thinking about making mandatory requirements for recycled contents. They should include there also the bio-based content if they have set up criteria for that, because as I said, it's the only chance to inject plastics which are non-fossil back to that circle where we absolutely need it, because we cannot produce a 100% recycling economy. So there the big task is. Let me address the bio-based plastic LCA issues. Next slide shows how I believe there are still some issues with the methodology. So today, if you look to polymers, you can make a cradle-to-gate analysis, and there you see the full potential of the bio-based carbon, of the non-fossil carbon within the material. But if you go to product carbon footprint, there's the need to release this carbon back to the atmosphere, whether you keep it in the products or not. In the calculation, and that is set up by the LCA rules, there is no chance to keep the carbon within, for example, recyclates or very durable applications. So, and that is given to me, is seeming to, at least in my view, is a wrong picture of what we could do. And this is also part of that seminar here to discuss this. So the LCA methodology should allow for a carbon sequestration status. Today, that's only possible for soil and for I think wood and natural forests, but not for plastic. So think about, if we have a very durable application, then, for example, you have a recyclable PET, you can keep it in the loop for a long time, maybe 5 times, 10 times. You could chemically recycle it, so you could cover easily also a product period of a decade or longer. And then you could use the recyclate for a different application, for example, furniture or construction material. And there you have a very long-term durable application that lasts for decades. A chair, I have many of them, plastic chairs here in my house also, is used for 30, 40, 50 years easily. And pipes within houses are also having such a product life. So you could cover easily a period of 50 years. And you need to then set up a special design that this is possible, of course, and use certain plastics only. If you go to the next slide, you see how important LCA methodology is now also in the mentioned Green Deal financial support rules. You have seen that LCA needs to be used to select and from certain criteria which products and which processes are up for financial support. So here, when you read that, maybe later, I don't want to spell it out now, you see that for recycled plastics and for bio-based plastic, references made that these feedstocks and these new polymers need to show their superiority by LCA. So LCA is important, and they are targeting here also greenhouse gas emissions. That's the #1 priority. The next slide shows also that the topic of carbon sequestration, that means CO2 sequestration, taking CO2 from the atmosphere, is a hot political topic in Europe. That's discussed now, and The Economist, only a few, I think that was also this year, wrote in a big article, what if carbon removal becomes the new big oil? So imagine these headlines. So if we would be able to remove carbon from the atmosphere and store it in plastics for 50 years or so, that should be a big deal for the future. Just show you some examples. Next slide shows how that could be done. So we have these products on the market, eco-trend in design furniture's use of recyclate. So you have chairs and things like that, and they build a 1 million tons markets on the plastic market. Same is true for, as I mentioned already, the construction materials. So one example that this is possible also with bio-based PE is on the next slide. If you see these kind of chairs, they can be used for many, many years. And of course, they can be recycled again. So it's not the end of the life. If this chair is being, let's say, not used by the owner anymore, it could be also stored at certain places, whatever, either in products, but also in other places, in other categories, even in landfill, if you want, like this, and then it's a stable material. So I come to the end with my conclusions and recommendations. It is clear climate emergency is #1 challenge. It's the biggest priority today because it's urgent and important. The role of plastics, as shown, is high on the agenda, and that's for good reasons, because it covers an enormous part of greenhouse gas emissions, especially in the future. To me, the LCA methodology has many parts which could be improved. One part is mentioned here is, for example, also the indirect effects of a fossil economy. I've not shown the picture here, but you all have them still in your mind. Last year, year before, California was burning, Australia was burning. We also had big floodings. We have loss of fertile ground because of these floodings. We have loss of biodiversity because of these big fires and so on. So, but these are not calculated well, these indirect effects, and not attributed to fossil plastics. It's still out there. The LCA does not give that, in my view, in an adequate range. And a different problem also with the LCA methodology, it doesn't really cope well with time-related effects. So if we have a climate emergency where time plays a big role, we should applaud and support products which have let's say a shelf life of 20, of 40, of 60 years, and should not calculate them necessarily as being incinerated. So this just makes no sense to me. So in the plastics economy, we have to inject new carbon because we have these losses in the circular system. And to me, bio-based plastics should be used, especially for this durable and well-recyclable application. Not in single use, not in applications which are hard to recycle, but specific for those to enable such a, let's say, 50 years capture of carbon. And that means you have buried the greenhouse gas CO2 by using plants for 50 years. And that's a big contribution, because in 30 and 50 years, we will have a lot of new technologies which would help us to combat climate change. So, and last word also is that the recyclability constraints will then favor certain recyclable polymers. If people have fear that we will all see single-use polymers from biodegradables, it is something which I cannot understand. The main polymers that will evolve in the future are those well-recyclable bio-based polymers. Then, last slide, the vision that we will see is, over the time, we will see that from the 100% of plastics being used in the system today, about, let's say, today maybe 90% are coming from fossils, and then this will diminish, this will be reduced to whatever we can achieve, but I'm sure we can go down to 30–20% of fossil plastics being used, and the rest is recyclates, bio-based plastics from different generations, and CO2-based plastics, if we do it right. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Keb, for this presentation. Given our time constraints, we'll go on with the third speaker, and we'll keep the questions for the discussion period at the end. So I will now welcome Marcelo Morandi, which is the General Head of Embrapa Environment Brazil. He's an agronomist. He has a master and PhD in plant pathology from the Federal University of Viçosa. He worked as a professor of plant pathology and environmental microbiology. He's a researcher at the Brazilian Agricultural Research Corporation, Embrapa Environment, since 2001, working in research and development at the interface between agriculture and the environment, with an emphasis on the areas of phytosanitary management, biological control, and metrics of sustainability assessment. He coordinated the Committee of the Rational Management of Pesticides Project Portfolio at Embrapa and the Biological Control Working Group of the Vegetable Health Committee of the Southern Cone. He gave several talks as invited speaker in international and national meetings. He is also a member of the Renova Biotechnical Committee. Since 2015, he has been the general head of Embrapa Environment, and today his presentation will be about the role of soil as a carbon sink. So, Mr. Morandi, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Anne. It's a great pleasure to be here in this high qualified round table. And so our question that we will address is the role of soil as a carbon sink. Please, next. So it's well established that the soil can be a source or a sink for the atmospheric carbon. And there is a general agreement that the technical potential for carbon sequestration in soil is quite significant. And there are some consensus on the magnitude of the potential. So I put here some numbers like 0.9 to 1.8 pentagrams of carbon per year worldwide. This is equivalent, 1 pentagram is equivalent to 3.6 billion metric tons of CO2. And so this soil carbon sequestration is the most promising climate change mitigation options for agriculture. You can please next. And so soil sequestration, carbon sequestration has a great potential for offset greenhouse gas emissions from fossil fuels, and but in contrast to industrial systems, agriculture is characterized by intermittent greenhouse gas flux from non-point source, and a high degree of system variability is added to the system. So this is depending on climate conditions, soil type, and agricultural practice. So the soil carbon sequestration can either increase or decrease as a result of the land management change and the land use change. I will talk about the land management change because Marcelo Moreira will talk later about the land use change conditions. Please, the next. So you can see here is just a conceptual illustration of how the climate change impacts the interaction with land management and sustainable or degraded outcome on soil. So the types and the intensity of the human land use can implicate and can affect the ability of the soil to operate as a carbon sinks. And so in managed agricultural lands, the degradation of these lands can typically reduce the soil organic carbon stocks that can be adversely affect the productivity and the ability of the soil to be a carbon sink. Next, please. So there are two very important questions that we should do at that time. Why to increase soil organic carbon and how to increase soil organic carbon on soil. So why to increase soil organic carbon is quite logical. So we are talking about biomass production, agronomic productivity, and we are talking about reduction of soil degradation. So the soil can be a sink of carbon. So as we have very quality soil and a lot more soil organic carbon added to the soil. We are working to not only to mitigation but to adaptation uh, to climate change and to the emissions of greenhouse gas, and how to increase this carbon on soil. So we have basically two big strategies, like reduce loss and increase input. We'll talk a little bit about that along our presentation. Please, next. So the land management change, it's all practice that we do on soil, on agricultural soil, that do not involve a permanent change in land cover. It means that it's the management, how we do agriculture in simple terms. So the management practice that affect soil carbon and the dynamic of the carbon on soil. There are everything we do on agricultural practice can affect that. So we put here some select typical practices that can affect these dynamics on soil, and I will talk a little bit about some of them on and how they can have the ability to make the soils a really very important sink of carbon. Next. This is just to pay attention to keep your attention that there is a saturation carbon, a maximum carbon that the soil can hold. That we call the stabilization of this capacity of the soil to absorb and to fix carbon. And there are different mechanisms, chemical, biological, and physical and biochemical process in soil. And this is high dependent on the type of soil and the climate conditions. Next, please. So this is a general model on how we can see the importance of the soil as a carbon sink, and how this carbon can go into the soil. So the basic process is based on the biomass production by photosynthesis systems. And so the main route of entry of carbon in soil is the crop residues and the roots. Beside that, we have a temporary carbon that is retained on biomass. And so this carbon in soil can increase the carbon sequestration that goes to the deeper areas of the soil. And if you do different practice, like practice or no-till, integration process, agroforestry, pasture recovery, and so on, you can increase this carbon in the soil. It's not necessarily a permanent carbon on soil, but it's a carbon that it's temporarily absorbed by soil, and part of that will be retained and be sequestered on soil and goes to the soil organic component of the soil. In the other side, we have other process that go through the processation of the biomass and the production of organic waste. Then this organic waste can go back to the soil as the organic waste as it is, or as like a biochar, for example, that it's organic matter that goes to a pyrolysis process. So you have a much more stable carbon that you can put in on the soil. Next, please. So here is just some examples on the production of biomass in tropical areas. So like you can see here, the difference of a single monocrop, like soybeans monocrop, to intensified systems that can promote sustainable land use intensification and extend the period of ground cover of the soil. And so you can have the addition of more biomass carbon in the system and less loss of carbon to soil degradation. Next one. So this is a result of 10 years evaluation. It's 6 years, in fact, from 2010 to 2016. Evaluation of carbon sequestration to soil by the livestock forest integration. Here we used uh, emission removal factors, default factors, and a national literature effect. So the tier 1 and tier 2 level of carbon sequestration. And so you can have here about from 6 tons of CO2 per hectare year to 4 to 6 tons of carbon of hectare year by the livestock forest integration systems. Next, please. The same here is for no TJ system that can add to the soil about 1.8 tons of CO2 per hectare year. Next. And so this is a study did in United States that the conservation tillage added to the reduction nitrogen fertilizer use in the implementing of cover crops reduce the greenhouse gas emission per unit of corn produced. So you can have a negative emission, so we can have sequestration on this system compared to a baseline scenario of corn soybean rotation. So the intensification of the use of soil, it's a very important way to make carbon goes to the soil. Next, please. And when you talk about organic residues like this is a conceptual model for soil carbon sequestration by the use of biochar. So you can see here in this scheme, this model, that the edge of the high stable carbon, like the biochar, contribute to to increase the ability of the soil to stock carbon and reduce the soil mineralization, the carbon mineralization from the biomass residues, and increase the productivity and the entry of carbon via crops, via the biomass from the roots. And it's another way that it's the reduction of the emission of nitrous oxide and N2O that can be reduced by the use of this kind of a stable carbon. Next, please. So here we have some examples of published articles that are showing that numbers of that on how the use of this very stable carbon in soil can not only increase the soil carbon stock on soil, but can reduce emissions due to nitrogen fertilizer and due to mineralization of the soil organic matter. Next, please. And the biochar can add much more carbon than if we use the introduction of the biomass on the soil. So the carbon sequestration due to the processation of this biomass can be used to improve carbon sequestration at a stable carbon on soil. Next, please. So you can have really very high rate of carbon sequestration by the use of the biochar and the reduction of the soil organic matter mineralization and the reduction of the nitrogen emissions due to chemical fertilizer. Please, next. But when you are talking about the soil organic carbon change assessments, like on LCA evaluations, we must have in mind that the fraction of the fixed carbon allocated below ground in terrestrial ecosystem is the most uncertain component of the global carbon assessment. So to choosing the best method highly depend on data availability and the user expertise to understand the systems. So we can go to direct measurements. That is the best way to have this number, but it's just feasible on small areas, on case specific, on site specific studies. But it's increased the level of certainty of this measurement, and you can go to like more general applications, site genetic applications, and go to dynamic and simple carbon models, or for the IPCC tier 2 or tier 1 emission factors. Next, please. So go to concluding, the land management practice can either increase or decrease this soil organic carbon stock, and this is right dependent on soil properties, climate, and biome vegetation, and is strongly influenced by the management of this land area. So we quickly discussed here why and how to increase stock by means of reduce loss and to increase inputs. And so it's very important that this carbon allocated below ground has a longer residence than the biomass in above ground counterparts. So this play a role in long-term, a key role on long-term carbon storage. In addition to the agricultural land management that we discussed here, some other activities are source of GHG emissions separate from this flux from the stock pool. So we can, the next please. You can imagine manage these activities such as equipment use, fertilizer application, residue management, livestock grazing, and so on, for the reduction of greenhouse gas emission and the emissions of other greenhouse, and this will impact in the flux of CO2 or in the carbon stocks in the soil. So to just finalize, together with this land management change, the land use change also affect the rate of soil carbon accumulation, and will have a great influence on GHG emissions. So this may play a very significant role on soil carbon stocks too. So thank you. I would like to thank you to my colleagues Cristiano and Renan that give me very insightful contributions and to review this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Morandi. So we'll go on with our next speaker. Is Marcelo Moreira. He's partner and senior researcher at Agroecone, Brazil. So he's a specialist in bioenergy, renewable energies, agribusiness, and sustainability sectors. He has a strong expertise in biofuels regulations, economic simulations, and life cycle analysis. His international experience include lectures for the US Department of Energy, International Energy Agency, Global Bioenergy Partnership, CARB, as well as diplomatic and scientific missions to different countries. He is the author of several publications in the biofuel area, including books high-level scientific papers, technical strategic reports. He owns a PhD in energy planning from the Faculty of Mechanical Engineering at the University of Campinas and a Master in Economics from the Faculty of Economics and Accounting of the University of Sao Paulo. He is an economist at the Pontifical Catholic University of Rio de Janeiro and a USDA Fellow in Climate Smart Agriculture. So his presentation would be about land use in Brazil. How can the sector prove to be more sustainable? So Mr. Moreira, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So thank you for the introduction. Thank you as well for all the valuable presentation that went before me. It's much more easier to talk about the subject of land use after we have such a good explanations on the topics and the importance of a full life cycle assessment for really understanding the impact of the products. If you could go to the next slide, just a quick presentation. Our company, AgroEquine, is a company dedicated to provide knowledge for a better economy. We work with global agriculture, applied modeling, sustainable environmental regulations, communications, and territorial intelligence. Next slide. Our international expertise, and this is the area I'm responsible for at the company, is related to the biofuels, right, and bioeconomy as a general. We have participated along the last 15 years in all major biofuels programs, including the RFS from the US EPA, Low Carbon Fuel Standard from California. We have been kindly invited by the European Commission to show up a little bit of our data from Brazil, and it was very well received in the Renewable Energy Directive, as well as the RED recast here in 2018, 2019. It was quite interesting to see how really when we present the data, the Commission incorporates that in their policies. We have been working as well in the structure of Renova Bio, mostly with analysis on land use change, and we are currently member of the Fuel Task Force at Porcia ICAO. Next slide, please. So my intention today is to talk a little bit about land use in Brazil. So the first slide is obviously what is land use in Brazil? What's the size? Well, Brazil has 851 million hectares. This is about 2 times the size of European Union and almost 35 times of the United Kingdom. So it's a big country, and this comes with huge challenges in terms of land use management. The country has about has a land cover of about 66% on natural forest, right, which includes savannas and natural formations. This is about 561 million hectares. This is a lot of natural areas, and again, a lot of responsibilities that we have to take care. The second most relevant land use in Brazil is pasture, about 21%, and which is followed by 7% of the area, almost 60 million hectares of cropland. So, in all this territory, Brazil is worldwide known by ethanol production. Ethanol is currently mostly made with sugarcane in Brazil. The sugarcane area has 10 million hectares, so this is 1% of land use in Brazil. With this amount of land, the country has been able to provide 46% of the light fleet, the energy to the light fleet, and 36% of the world sugar trade, along with other uses. So this is really an important message that with a very small amount of land, a lot can be done. So we can go to the next slide, please. A very important information on sugarcane. Well, it's located in Brazil, quite far from deforestation hotspots. You see on this table, from the left to the right, the states with highest deforestation rates, accumulated deforestation rates, and the blue bars are the areas for sugarcane in Brazil. And we see a distance of 2,300 kilometers between the center of the sugarcane production in São Paulo and the most accumulated deforestation, which is in Pará. This is 2,300 kilometers. It's a 7-hour flight. This is the time that we take to go, for example, from Brazil to Europe. So this is quite far. Next slide, please. And so it's very important to understand the expansion pattern of sugarcane in Brazil. So this is data from MAP Biomas, which is a project founded by several NGOs and environmental fund. We can see that using the data that from the sugarcane area in 2017, 57% of the area was already sugarcane in 2008. And this is where a significant land use management happened. The change from conventional burning practice to green harvesting practice. I hope that we have the time today, then the other Marcelo Morando, will talk about the potential impacts of this in soils. So let's look a little bit from the area that was not sugarcane and what it was in the past. So about more than half was pastures or mixing agricultural and pasture areas. And another part was already annual or perennial crops. So we have in total less than 1%, about 1% of sugarcane expansion that might be some conversion of natural forest in 10 years, which is only a part of total area, and we should always take care on some or some margins of this information. But it's a quite relevant data. We have presented this particular data for the RED 2, RED request, and it was considered on the setting the high and low ILUC risk analysis for biofuels. Next slide, please. But we can also flip the coin and look, well, in each state, how much of the vegetation has increased and how much of the vegetation has decreased. From the left to the right, the pink dots are states where the natural vegetation has decreased, and the green dots are states where natural vegetation has increased. And we see that 81% of the sugarcane area is on states where we actually had an increase of natural vegetation. This would be quite interesting to see. Also at the farm level, this is something that we really want to do. I have not had the time to do that, but this is on our research agenda. Next slide, please. One of the reasons we suspect we have seen this growth in natural vegetation in sugarcane areas is the respect for the Brazilian Forest Code. As we have seen on earlier presentation today, Hugo mentioned the objective of having 30, or I think, yes, it was 30% of the land in Europe to be set aside for conservation reasons. We have a similar law in Brazil where the minimum is 20% within private lands, and the maximum in particular areas is from 50 to 80% of the farm must be set aside for conservation reasons. And this is one of the most important land management tools in Brazil right now. Next slide, please. Another very important land management tool is cattle intensification. As we show, about 20% of Brazil is covered by pastureland. A good part of it, 95 million hectares, have some degree of degradation. And we see that this can be restored, and yields can be significantly expanded. So you can see at the bottom right of this presentation the productivity of cattle that rose from 1.7 heads per hectare in 2019 to 4.2 currently in 2016. And at the same time, this made the opportunity to decrease the pastureland area a long time. We also see that, well, this is a big improvement in productivity. It will also have some impacts on soil. And what we have seen in the most recent data is an expansion of 36 million hectares of recovered pastureland in last decade. Next slide, please. Another way that Brazil is managing its territory, and it's a land-saving strategy, is the integrated production, where you can produce more than one crop at the same time, and this has had an exponential growth. We used to be at 1.8, 1.9 million hectares of integrated production system in 2005, and you can see that this number has continuously grown and reached 15 million hectares of integrated production in 2018. Again, as a reference, total sugarcane area in Brazil is about 10 million hectares. So the integrated systems are already higher than the sugarcane area in Brazil. Next, please. Another very important land saving strategy is the intercropping or sequestration cropping between soybeans and maize. You can see on the graph on the left the maize area. So you can see that, well, maize and soybeans can be produced due to improvement in technology in the same land once a year, and then you can produce both with this improved technology. You can produce both in a single year. So this is double cropping. The land required for maize used to be about 12 million hectares in 85, and due to this technology, this land has consistently been reduced and is now about 4 million hectares, which was compensated by the area of second crop. You can see the blue line. It is growing exponentially, and this is very interesting because you don't need additional land to produce more food, feed, or more currently ethanol in Brazil. You can go to the next slide, please. Another feature of Brazilian land use, particularly dedicated to ethanol, is high efficiency of the land. You can see in these bars the yields in terms of liters of ethanol per hectare. You can see that Brazil has the highest yield in the world with sugarcane, Brazilian sugarcane, and now with improved use of residues in second generation, it goes up more than 8,000 liters per hectare. It is very important as well, something quite new, the production of ethanol from second crop of corn. The corn in Brazil, second crop of corn, has a lower yield than compared to the United States, but it doesn't use additional land. This is why it is not in blue in this chart, because it's not the same metric, right? So this makes a lot of difference, both for the overall land use in Brazil and particularly for the production of maize ethanol in Brazil. Next slide, please. So it's it's very important for Brazil to really participate in the discussions that are being made regarding biofuels. This chart brings the greenhouse gas emissions, the carbon footprint, of ethanol in different fuels and programs. So here we have at the left the renewable fuel standard. The first estimation was about 50 grams of CO2 per megajoule. And with all this information that I have already shown to you, and improvement in modeling, this has been reduced to about 4 grams of CO2 per megajoule. The same happened with California. It was about 46 grams of CO2 per megajoule at the beginning, and with significant contributions from different research companies in Brazil, including Embrapa, including our company, Agroecony. This has been reduced with better information on the modeling to 12 grams of CO2 per megajoule. And this is the most current estimates from the CORSIA regulation, which are all about 10 or less grams of CO2 per megajoule, but this is for biokerosene. Very importantly, and this is where I really like to be, the other Marcelo has already shown the importance of soil carbon stocks. The models used here did not consider all the research that Marcelo is having in Embrapa, and it is urgent. Please, Marcelo, publish all this new information, because it is really needed to improve these models even further. The models currently do not take account from all the changes that happens within the farm with places that you don't have land use change. So next slide, please. We are also very pleased to see that the EU Joint Research Center also thinks that sugarcane ethanol has very good outcomes in terms of sustainability. This is a publication, I think it was on 2017. Next, please. This is a very recent publication that we have leaded we start to see the other side of land use, and we start to see really negative outlook. And here negative can be interpreted in different ways. Here we mean that at the end of the day, when you grow, you produce ethanol for example, second crop of corn, you can have higher carbon stocks in the land instead of emitting greenhouse gas emissions. The results will depend a little bit on the assumptions, but almost all the results show this synergic effect between land carbon and biofuels. Next slide, please. And another very recent development in Brazil, it's Renova Bio. So in history, one of the major responsibles for reducing deforestation in Brazil was the improvements on satellite interpretation, satellite imageries. Then we have this kind of surveillance has reached a floor. The reduction has not been observed so far. We are not moving to the rural registry. So every farm in Brazil must have its limits on a GIS database, and they must provide that to the government, and it is an open database. So we can do a lot of land use management and a lot of traceability with this information. And RenovaBio has combined this information with the implementation of the forest code that we have just shown before. There is our best guess on how, particularly close to sugarcane areas, natural vegetation is regrowing. So RenovaBio comes with this pretty new strategy with land use. So it protects natural vegetation you cannot produce on areas that has been converted for the production of biofuels. And it also couples with this new GIS technologies that allows for high traceability along the supply chain. Next slide, please. So as final consideration, so the first big lesson, and it's very important to show and think and say as well, biofuels should not expand over natural vegetation. When we saw those kinds of discussions, we also have to understand the importance of natural vegetation and the lack of benefits on expanding over it. We should also always think on ways where bioenergy can also foster forest expansion, right? This is possible. We have enough room in Brazil for the expansion of bioenergy simultaneous to the expansion of forest. This is why it's very important, the Brazilian Forest Code, the initiatives in the EU to expand forests and natural vegetation. And this is not a problem at all for bioenergy, particularly if you can show, and this makes a difference when you do that or you don't do that. The expansion of perennial crops and high yield technologies, including residues, is a solution, as well as the expansion of the production of ethanol using second crops or other materials used in second crops. And we always flip the coin when we start looking closer, and Marcelo brings some new results for us on management practice on soil organic carbon, how this practice should be incentivized in a way to retain carbon in terrestrial pools, biochars, and also some companies, and this is very important, are starting to study the bioenergy CCS in Brazil. And really, this is a new technology that will need carbon prices to develop. So regulation is important. At the same time, it's very important that we provide, the sector provide transparency and good measurements tools. And at the final comment goes to, well, all this will need some private and public policies to really reward the good practice and redirect progress in this direction. So thank you. Those are my comments, and happy to see the next panelist and go to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moreira. Now we are going on with our last speaker, which is not the least, Mr. Yuki Kabe from Braskem in Brazil. Yuki Kabe is a chemical engineer from the Escola Politécnica Universidade de São Paulo by training, but has been working since 2002 in sustainable development with emphasis on life cycle management. He joined Braskem in 2013 and has developed over 150 projects including life cycle assessments, design for environment, and supply chain life cycle management. His talk will be about the future of the chemical industry. Mr. Cabé, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Annie. It is a pleasure and an honor to be part of this very high-level panel, and I hope to keep up with the high level of the presentations. When we talk about the future of something, I think there are two possible approaches. One is the futurology approach, which is trying to predict what is going to happen in the future. And that's not the approach that I would like to take. I would like to take more an approach of what Braskem sees as the best possible future. What is the vision of Braskem for how the chemical industry should be in 30 years or 50 years? So I've started building on some futurology exercises from others. So next slide, please. This is a prediction of how the plastic sector could be in 2050 if the circular economy initiatives really pick up and we have significant compound aggregated growth rates of up to 18%. That would show that in 2050, if we consider mechanical recycling, chemical recycling, and physical-chemical recycling, we could get to up to 60% of the demand being supplied by the circular economy initiatives that are in place. And this, of course, requires massive investment in the recycling industry, both in new technology and in new business models. But, and next slide, please. This is a economic model or a prediction that still relies on finite resources, particularly fossil resources. And we actually see a small growth in the consumption of fossil feedstock because of the growth of the market. So we could, the total consumption of plastics is projected to jump from the current 300 million tons to an excess of 1 billion tons a year of plastic consumption. Of course, there are several uncertainties in this number, but both the inefficiencies of the circular systems and the projected growth of the market to include the new booming middle class from South and Southeast Asia, and especially Africa, into the modern society, that would require a significant expansion of the industry. And so if we truly want a circular economy decoupled from fossil resources, then what we need is, the next slide please, is a model something like this. So the carbon neutral circular economy, what Braskem is calling, is something like this, where the recycler or the circular economy supplies most of the demand of plastics, but the inefficiencies of the systems and the expected growth is supplied by bio-based feedstocks. Those bio-based feedstocks, if we are to rise up to the challenge, we need compounded aggregated growth rates close to 20% a year, which is virtually impossible without a strong policy that favors investment in these bio-based feedstocks. So this is the only way Braskem sees to effectively decouple our growth and our business from the carbon-intensive feedstocks and really reach our goals of carbon neutrality by 2050. So next slide, please. Our roadmap is based on I'm not seeing. Sorry, I have frozen for an instability in the network. So our roadmap for neutrality, it includes energy efficiency, using less energy, and using better energy. So not only reducing our specific energy consumption, but using energy from renewable sources with significantly lower carbon footprints. We also need assets that are flexible in our feedstocks, that could use both circular and bio-based feedstocks to produce the polymers that the society needs. We also need new process and new technologies in new assets that would specifically produce these bio-based polymers. And of course, from what we have seen from other presentations, we rely on better agricultural practices. So these agricultural practices that could increase soil organic carbon, that could increase could be used as zinc. We are calling them regenerative agriculture, in contrast to the current model that depletes the ecosystemic capacity of the soils. And as some presenters have also shown, we also are researching carbon capture, utilization, and storage technology, as well as bioenergy carbon capture and storage. So this is the roadmap that Braskem sees for neutrality. And let's put it in the life cycle of a product. Thank you. This is how we see this. So this is the carbon footprint of one bio-based product, which is the BioPE, and it's broken down by life cycle stage. And we have put in blue what are the main drivers, and in light blue what could be possible routes to enhance our carbon footprint, or either to diminish the negative contributions or to increase the positive contributions of our current systems. So this is the current status for our BioPE. Next slide, please. And this is just to put some perspective on what we see could be the contributions of what we call the regenerative agriculture and the backs into our potential system. So right now we are avoiding something around 5 tons of CO2 per ton of fossil PE that is replaced by a bio-PE, and that number could increase to 8 to 9 tons per ton, and we actually don't know what is the full potential of bio-based materials. But coupling the bioeconomy with these negative emission technologies certainly will lead to excellent results in the future. And Braskem sees ourselves playing a very strategic role because we are in Brazil and we see that Brazil is uniquely poised to become the major player in the bioeconomy of the future. So next slide, please. We have an incredible position in terms of land availability. And like Marcelo Morandi taught us, we have a lot of land available, and there is the cattle intensification technologies that could free even more land without us having to convert any natural land in Brazil. And so this is just a perspective on how much land it would be required if we were to, for instance, if we were to expand our capacity to produce the green polyethylene, the bio-based polyethylene, to the same amount of our fossil PE production, so replace fossil by bio-based PE, we would require just 1.1% of the idle land in Brazil. And we could supply the world with polyethylene and this, of course, would require some conversion, but with 58% or 32 million hectares of land to produce ethanol. And that's just considering the first production of ethanol from sugarcane, not considering a second production from corn that could be grown concomitantly, or even second generation ethanol from agricultural residues. So we see that Brazil is in a very good shape to be the major player in the future bioeconomy. And so just next slide, please. Just in conclusion, we see that the carbon neutral circular economy, we see that the bio-based polymers and the chemicals are essential for this carbon neutral circular economy, which is our vision for the future. And Braskem is already building this biofuture today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kabe. And I want to thank again all the invited speakers today who have presented very interesting issues and very broad issues also regarding the use of biomaterials and the potential climate benefits or even impacts in some cases. So we'll now go with a short question period. So I'll begin with the questions from Jorge Soto. Who says, thank you for the excellent presentations. Considering that a source of carbon will be needed in a carbon neutral society, and considering that biosources could be an important source of carbon, what will be the main global policy guidance that you would recommend to be supported by the BioFuture platform? I don't know if one of you would like to answer the question.
Maybe I can give a try at it. As I have tried to portray in my presentation, the bio-based feedstocks will become a significant part of the carbon sourcing only if we have a significant investment in the sector. So right now, the biomaterials industry is responsible for around 1% of the total production, and we needed to rise to 100% of our current production to supply 40% of the future demand. So that means that very aggressive policies have to be put in place, policies that would incentivize the adoption and the investment in the assets that will produce those biofeedstocks. And so, and for that, we need instruments, science that will show the real contribution and the real danger of the bio-based industry. So we cannot have trade-offs in this process. So the biomass industry has to grow sustainably. And so we need adequate methodologies, and science, I think, are the ground for any future policies. Because unless the policies are grounded in sound science, we can have rebound effects and unforeseen consequences. So I would first advocate for strong science behind the sustainability assessment of the feedstocks, upon which sound policies that would stimulate the initiatives that have proven to be sustainable to go forward. I think I would kick the debate with this.
Complement as well. So from our experience in biofuels, which started at the very same wrong foot at the beginning regarding land use, we saw significant improvement in methodologies in the science surrounding the impacts of biofuels. And what the best lesson we have learned is to really cooperate and integrate the scientists, integrate the information, provide exchange information, and improve the science that we currently have. It sounds like we really need this, and this could be a very good place for action from the BioFuture platform.
From my side, I think that all presentations today have shown to me that you have to take a holistic approach to this. You need to look at the full environmental footprint of technologies and approaches, and reducing it to carbon capture or production is too short. And I think when I look at both Marcelo's presentations and your presentation, I think there are a lot of elements that need to be added in that regard. So the full environmental footprint of production and consumption need to be taken into account. What I think is also interesting is that Yuki's presentation assumes that the demand will actually continue more or less unabated, and that the only way to deal with it is to change feedstock. And I think that's a question that's an issue that is questioned in Europe in that sense. Let's put it that way. So I think that those are elements that I want to add into the debate as well. So I think that's just two additional things that probably in the methodology and in the further research need to be factored in more strongly. I saw it in all presentations, but I think it probably needs to be expressed in a more explicit way.
Anybody else wants to add something? No? So I'll go to the next question asked by Glosia Mendes Souza. And the question is more specifically for Mr. Shally. So could you clarify what is the basics for circular economy, skepticism on bioplastics? What is the scientific evidence, especially considering all the conservation and sustainability policies and controls you very well laid out? Isn't it a big risk to forego mitigation potential from bio-based plastics, considering the EU's vow to achieve net neutrality and move away from fossil sources?
I think it's the skepticism is a skepticism towards bio-based plastics as a silver bullet. I think bio-based plastic can play a positive role for specific applications, but it cannot be disassociated from the need to change the design of the material, to change the design of the product, and to change the use and the disposal. Second point is that in all the growth scenarios, there is no way the bio-based materials can actually respond to the triple demand that we have for food, feed, and feedstock. I mean, there's just simply not enough earth that we have for cultivation. And when I look at the modeling that Marcelo Augusto brought forward in saying the sustainable intensification, which is crucial to avoid unsustainable agricultural expansion, I think that is really the key to that. So it's not a skepticism with regard to bio-based plastics as such. It is to be looked at with a very critical eye, saying, what is it good for? And obviously, bio-based plastics that is a polymer that is recycled is a win-win. But a bio-based plastics in a very orthodox chemical composition that is very difficult to recycle and goes into unsustainable plastics products doesn't help us at all. So I think it has again to be looked at as a whole in a holistic approach to the totality of the life cycle of the product and the life cycle of the material, and whether it can actually be reinserted into a circular model, and whether the supply base is actually stable and sustainable. That is what all the other speakers have actually clearly pointed to. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question is for Mr. Morandi, and it's from Marcelo Menossi. So do you think that land management policies are needed to enhance sustainability in agriculture?
Yeah. In fact, it's right necessary to have policies that indicate for this sustainable intensification. We have some policies in practice now, like the low carbon emission agricultural system that can have differentiate financing for investment for agricultural improvement. But when you have like other policies like the bio inputs policies that are incentivizing the use of bioproducts for pest control, for nutrient uptake, and so on. There are some policies on agroforestry incentivization, and you have a big policy that Marcelo Moreira bring to us, that is the forest code, that it's really a very important policy to enhance the sustainability of agriculture, to have the conservation preservation areas inside the at the same space, at the same landscape of agricultural practice. So this is quite very important to have these policies to direct the intensification, sustainability intensification on agriculture.
Thank you very much. So it's now we have 2 minutes left before the end of the session. So I want to take time to thank again all of our speakers. So Mr. Morandi, Chali, Kabe, Moreira, and Kub. Thank you very much for your talks. And I also want to thank every attendee at the seminar to have listened to us. Also, we didn't have time to answer so many questions, so I invite all speakers to connect thereafter to the WOVA platform, the platform for the conference. So if there are other questions addressed to you, we will post them there so that you will be able to answer these questions from the attendees. So once again, I thank everybody once again, and have a nice evening to all the attendees. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye bye.